Hello, and welcome to Never Is Funny, the show where I, Patrick, talk to funny people and hope to God they talk back. Now this time, the funny people I'm talking to is Bobby Sheehan, a comic straight from the thriving comedy heart of New York City. His fringe show, which you should be booking tickets to see right after this, is called American History Sex. He's a seasoned stand-up and has his own podcast where he talks to comedians, the Before Hours. You should check that out, too, once you've first listened to every episode of Never Is Funny and followed it and me on all of the socials. Anyway, we talk about his show and various experiences he's had doing sets. It's a good one. It's a funny one. I can't think of anything to say third. Why don't you listen yourself and fill in the blank?
Welcome back to the show, where I talk to comedians in the know. That's right. It's Never Was Funny. It's Never Was Funny. The show is called Never Was Funny. It's the name of the show, by the way. Never Was Funny. That's the gist of it. The name. The show's called Never. This is like the title music. It's called Never Is Funny. All right.
Welcome back to the show, everyone. This is Never Is Funny. So this time, I have on stand-up comedian Bobby Sheehan. Am I saying that right? Is it Sheehan? Sheehan?
Yes. Some people pronounce it Sheehan, and I don't correct them, but yeah, I do prefer Sheehan.
Sheehan, great. And he, amongst other things, you told me that you know too much about Abraham Lincoln and Eminem. A, interesting combination of figures, and B, the idea of it being an excessive volume is interesting to me. How did you quantify that?
Yeah, I think to know a lot about one person that you're not related to or have never met or is dead, as is the case with one of them, comes across as strange to most people.
Right.
And they are very different. I think the only thing they have in common is they're white guys that got the respect of black people, right? Which is, Patrick, you're a white person as well. That's what we want more than anything else.
That's
right?
true.
So,
there's truth to that.
And yeah, it's I love music and I love history. So those are my two favorite guys from both of those genres. And I think they're kind of similar in a lot of ways.
Right.
Like Eminem, absentee dad, bad mom. Abraham Lincoln, dead mom, bad dad. So they had a similar upbringing. Abraham Lincoln was born in a log cabin in Kentucky, and Eminem was born in Missouri.
Yeah.
So both not ideal places to be born.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Eminem, very good rapper. Abraham Lincoln, it's not clear on whether or not he ever rapped, but he did write awful, awful poetry.
Did he? I did not know that.
Yeah. If your listeners after, guys, pause the podcast, Google Abraham Lincoln poetry. I was about to say you won't be disappointed, but you will be disappointed. It's terrible. Yeah, it's a really good thing that president thing worked out for him because he was not going to make it as an artist.
Yeah, I was going to make it on the poetry circuit.
Yeah.
That's fire. I like that. But yeah, okay, aside from those two, although I don't know if they might pop up again, particularly Lincoln with regards to your show, but if you're introducing yourself, how would you describe yourself? Would you just call yourself a comedian? I know you do a podcast as well. What's your kind of go-to, like, hey, I'm Bobby and I'm blank?
Yeah, absolutely. I do have a podcast. It's called the Before Hours Podcast. It's an internet radio phenomenon hosted by an occasional morning person. I ask the most interesting people about their life, love, sleep, routine, stress and setbacks, and whatever else comes to mind. That's my elevator pitch for my podcast.
That's
but I think, I would describe myself first and foremost as a stand-up comedian, and then secondary to that as a history buff. And then the third thing I would say is that I'm a very generous lover.
Right.
So those three things in a row are most important for me. Yeah, I started doing comedy about 8 years in New York City. Started in New York because that's the closest city that I'm from. I'm from the suburbs in a place called the Hudson Valley, about 15 miles north of the city.
Right.
So I started doing comedy there, and I love it, but I also love history. And talking about knowing too much about something, I know too much about the American Civil War, which is something, the reason I say too much is because if you say to someone you're a Civil War buff, it's very terrifying.
Yes.
Right? First of all, I have to immediately clarify that I'm on the north side, the Union side, the good guys.
Good. I was going to have to check that.
It's really the only hobby where you have to like say you're on the right side, right?
That's good. I mean, doing comedy in New York is very exciting to me. That's very like, because I live in rural Wales. It's a struggle to even find open mics around me where I am at the moment. So the whole like fantasy of the New York comedy scene is very exciting. I mean, are you in New York mainly because that's where you live? Or do you really enjoy the New York comedy scene?
Oh, I enjoy the New York comedy scene and New York City in general, although I think it's very important to take periodic breaks because it is a city that will make you lose your mind.
Right.
So that's why I'm happy. I'm making my Fringe debut this August, and I'm happy to do it, of course, but I'm happy to just be in another city. I think Edinburgh, hoping to God I'm saying that correctly, has like 500,000 people, which is
Yeah.
literally a 16th the size of New York City. So I feel like for the first time in a while, I'm in a place where I could, if I'm standing outside, I don't know why I'm doing this, but I could put my arms out and spin around and not bump into somebody. And that is very good for my mental health.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, absolutely, kid. It's surprising in Edinburgh how often you can. I was up for a couple of days last week, and it's surprising how often you can turn a street and there's just nobody there at some point of the day, which is nice for a city. I mean, this is your Fringe debut. What's your path been like here? Have you done like a full hour before?
I've done a full hour before. I wrote my hour with the intention of performing it here.
Right.
Because when I started, I feel like in New York, and maybe in the States in general, our conception of stand-up is like jokes, 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 right?
Right.
And I think like in Europe and maybe even in other places outside of North America, it's they want to know more about you and who you are,
Yeah.
right? So I started to, not to get too heady, but I was like, all right, I have to sit down and figure out who I am now.
Yeah.
Instead of doing like unrelated dick jokes for 60 minutes. Although that's the name of my second. But yeah, so for a while I was doing like unrelated, like just like silly thoughts that I had.
Yeah.
But I started talking about my love of history, which I thought would not be interesting, but it seems to be interesting to some people. And if I relate it to myself, I think people get interested. I think anybody that like has something they're interested in, if you get them talking, if you get anybody talking, they become interesting
Yes.
eventually. You know what I mean? So
that's the goal of the show anyway.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. Yeah, I think a lot of people cover the same topics, right? Like if you talk to comedians and they just come out of an open mic, they're like, all right, well, it's like kind of an inside baseball joke, but it's like, okay, I know that dating in New York is hard now.
Yeah.
I get it. I've had enough people tell me, but I kind of found a hack because I'm like, all right, no one's talking about Abraham Lincoln, right?
Right.
No one's talking about the Gettysburg Address. No one's reciting the Gettysburg Address in its entirety, which is a real thing that I did in front of an audience one time.
That's fantastic. Did you deliver it like a bit? Did you leave gaps for audience laughter?
So I think our brains were a little broken after lockdown.
Yeah.
So the open mic scene in New York, by the way, which is for anyone that's been to an open mic outside of New York or LA, it's a little different because I feel like in most places you go to an open mic and at least half the audience are just people that came to watch, have a couple beers and listen to amateur comedians. But like in New York, and it shouldn't be this way, but it just is that like some rooms will just be other performers, which is not the way to do stand up. It's not the way it functions. I always say it's the most unnatural thing in the world to tell jokes in front of people where you know their names individually.
Yes.
That's not the audience you want. So you would just do like these terrible rooms sometimes where you're like, funny people would go up there with their best material and everyone's just stone facing them and not laughing.
Yeah.
Which is like not their fault. We're all like jaded from like comedy overload. So as a very like alty way to break people, I'd have certain speeches memorized that I would say, and the laughter would come from just the audacity that I'm doing it.
Yeah.
Right. And I'm not very like alty. I don't do like alternative comedy, but I feel like you had to do something to break them. But now I have 3 separate speeches memorized. So I have the Gettysburg Address memorized. That one's easy. It's under 3 minutes long. I have the FDR post Pearl Harbor speech. That one's really good. It's the one that starts the day that'll live in infamy. That's it. That one gets me excited. Oh, and one for you, Patrick. I learned it specifically for you. The Winston Churchill, "We shall fight them on the beaches."
Oh yeah, that's a classic.
But I can't do any. I could do the accent of a man that was raised in the northeast of the United States. That's the only
Yes.
accent I could do. So
Winston Churchill's a little tricky. I mean, I think part of what makes him hard to do is whenever you think of him, you always think of him in like radio recordings from the 40s, and it's quite difficult with your own voice to get in like, I don't know, static. So, but that's definitely a good selection. I mean, that's quite a skill, to be honest, to just be able to memorize speeches. Like, is that something that you have to sit down and really grind away at, or do you just have a knack for?
yeah, I think I have a knack for memorization. If we want to tie the things together, I know a lot of rap lyrics by heart, right? Because I'm very musical, I think. Like, I'm an amateur guitar player. I'm not like an amazing musician, but I could
Okay.
sort of like, that's the way my brain works. Like, I'm walking around and I'm thinking of things that rhyme and I'm singing random songs
Right.
and I'm driving my parents and or flat. It's crazy, depending on where I am. So there's a sing-songy way to like speeches, especially old-time speeches.
Yes.
Not necessarily anymore, because I feel like you hear a speech from Biden, or I was going to say, or you hear a speech from Trump, but that's not true. He goes off the rails pretty quickly. I'm not a big fan of that guy, but I will say he's not boring, right?
Yeah.
But like most modern politicians have this, like, you could tell it's written by a speechwriter.
Oh
But
yeah.
I think even like Lincoln, FDR, Winston Churchill, FDR and Winston Churchill are probably like the last class of people that actually wrote the speeches by themselves. And it has almost, instead of like a formulaic feel, it has a poetic feel to it.
Right.
Even like the recitation, like says, we'll fight them on the beaches, we'll fight them on the landing grounds, we'll fight them on the hills and on the streets. Like, he knows how to get people energized
Yes.
in a way that I think is very cool.
That is very. Do you?
Not saying Winston Churchill would be a great rapper, because I don't think he would be. Although the lisp, I think, would be fun,
That is true.
which I didn't realize until I listened to the actual recording.
I didn't know he had a lisp.
He has like, I don't know if lisp is the proper. He has like a way of talking like this,
Right.
and maybe it's because he was always chewing cigar or he was hungover. I don't know, but I watched the movie. I want to say it's The Darkest Hour.
Oh yeah, I haven't seen it, but yeah, I know of.
So he does that speech, and I forget the actor's name, but he does like a fantastic job.
Yeah.
And then you go back to hear the actual speech, and you're like, ah, this is less exciting.
Right. Yeah.
No disrespect, Winston, if you're listening.
It's alright. I think he can tank a few. Is that something you've applied to the way you write your own stand-up then? Do you think of it? Are you lyrical in the way you write sets? I mean, do you do a lot of writing, or is it more bullet pointy?
I do a lot of writing, although I will say that I do most of my writing on stage. And I think it sounds more impressive than it really is. It's just like there's a certain amount of laziness to it,
Yeah.
because I'll think of a premise and I'm like, hey, before I think any more about this, I'm going to see if the premise itself is funny.
Right.
So I'll go to like a small show or an open mic and say the premise. And then if it's nothing, I'm like, well, I'm glad I didn't waste any more cognitive
Yeah.
space on that. You know what I mean? But there is something like kind of lyrical or like rhythmic about jokes. Like if you listen to old comedy albums where there was more of a formula, you hear, I forget what comedian said this, but that they think of laughter as like waves in the ocean, right?
Right.
Where it's like, ba ba ba, ha ha ha, ba ba ba, ha ha ha. And then
Yeah.
if you're a weird guy or you got, you break the formula in some way, then it's like a typhoon,
Right.
or like a hurricane or something. So
I've had a few too many compounds, I think. When
oh yeah, I've had a lot of droughts myself. Yeah, a lot of tied in and not out. That's I think there's a strength to bombing.
Yes.
And I've never done it, but I've heard of other people doing it, and it sounds stressful. But no, that's I bombed a ton of times, and there's a strength that comes with it. Because I think people that don't do comedy rarely, if ever, experience the situation where they'll say something and someone just
Yeah.
stares at them. In polite conversation, if you make what registers to someone else as a joke,
Yes.
they're gonna laugh at it politeness. Like doing stand-up is the only situation in which it's completely fine for them to just stare at you.
Yeah.
You just have to emotionally deal with that.
It is. I don't think there's a strength to it. I think as well, like, I haven't done very many so far. It's something I've been meaning to kind of try and involve myself in more. But I say I've only had one set that bombed, and I should clarify by saying that was my maybe third of 3 sets, so it's not as impressive. But I walked out of it kind of enjoying it, and I think because it felt like this badge of like, I could now say, yeah, I'm a real comedian, you know, I bombed a set. Bombed a gig, it's just part of the job, you know? And I think in a lot of ways it's a really good experience because it kind of shows you that, like, the big fear when you're starting out with this stuff, or at least is for me, is like, oh, what if it goes terrible? What if nobody laughs? And then you find out that, yeah, that is going to happen. And it sucks, but also you don't die, so it's livable.
Yeah, I always think of like when I have a bad set, if I could explain it to like someone that lived, you know, over 300 years ago, you know, they're like, what happened? And I'm like, they didn't laugh. He would just be like, oh, cool, my kid died today. Not even my first dead kid, and I don't have penicillin, and I'm worried that there's witches in my blood, you know?
That's very true.
Right before I came here, actually, when I was back home in the States, I was doing a set, and I mean, I have to accept a certain amount of responsibility, but boy, were the chips stacked against me.
Right.
You know, like, it's so fragile. People have to be sat correctly.
Oh,
All the
yes.
show have gone well. The lighting has to be good. The tech has to work, and like, just everything was kind of not going my way. So I knew it was going to be an uphill battle, but the set went even worse than I had anticipated it.
Right.
And I remember I made a joke, and there's like 24 people in the crowd. It's a small room. Of those 24 people, one person laughed, which is fine. I'll take it. But then someone from across the room, I can't believe this. Someone from across the room went, "What are you laughing at?" Like, he couldn't even let one person enjoy the joke. He's like, "No, bro, this sucks.
So fucking funny.
I hate this."
I mean, how did you react did you just keep going? Did you try and like banter with it?
So I don't typically get angry, and on stage I don't get angry, and I stopped myself from really going at this guy.
Yeah.
I remember exactly what I said. I said, "He's laughing at the joke, you fucking goose." Like, I changed my mind at the last second. I was just like,
fall back on it.
Don't get too crazy. And the idea of calling someone a fucking goose is very funny to me. So
it is
at least
brilliant.
I have that. I would never, by the way, my biggest pet peeve, or one of my biggest, is like a comedian that's like, you guys can laugh, you know. It's like,
yeah,
they do know they could do. It's almost like telling someone, it's the equivalent of being like, you could come, you know, you could come if. It's like, well, now I'm not in the mood to.
Yeah. Well, I like to put that a lot. If sex isn't going well, I like to kind of pull up my shirt and go, "Oh, tough crowd."
Yeah.
That one didn't land.
I'll panic if, like, you know, she's not responding to what I'm doing. I'll just go, "So where are you from?"
What do you do for work?
Yeah. And she's like, "I'm a sex worker. That's why we're here." You know.
That's good. It's good material. I mean, speaking of sex at work, your work stand-up comedy, and sex is involved in your show. And so is history. And speaking of history, the history of how you got here, where was I going? Somewhere. Yes, so that was it, right. So your new show, the makeup of it, which I think after the break, I want to get specifically into the nitty-gritty of this specific show. But again, getting there, you mentioned kind of adding in history was maybe a newer thing, some of the other stuff you talk about. How similar is this to work you've done before? Does it kind of feel like a natural, slow evolution, or is this a big shift in terms of what you're doing?
Oh, it's definitely the former. I think it's a slow evolution. If anything, I thought of the title and then worked backwards.
Right.
And I had like these disjointed bits that I could like join in the string of a theme.
Yes.
You know what I mean? And it helped me write a beginning and write an end. But yeah, it's the culmination of what I've been doing for the last, well, I want to say 6 years, because I've been doing comedy for 8 years, but the first 2 years was like, you know, figuring out how to do jokes, you know, because you have, I'm sure you experienced the same thing. Like, you're the funny guy in your friend group, right? And you're like, well, how do I turn the audience into my friend group? which is essentially what like establishing likability is in the beginning of your set. You're like, okay, we're all friends now. Okay,
Yes.
I know you just met me, and it's very unnatural because usually in a conversation where people laugh, we're all talking and we know each other and whatever, but you're all sat in a semicircle and looking up slightly, and I have a spotlight on me, even though you have no idea who I am,
Yes.
which is such a fun dynamic, right? Someone who's famous and has people buy tickets specifically to see him or her, it's a totally different thing than me being like, listen, you're just going to have to believe me. All
Yes.
right. The
Very
first
much
few
is.
minutes, I'm going to need the benefit of doubt from you. I'm going to talk about the presidents and their sex lives for an hour, and you're going to have a nice time,
Yes.
you know?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So I wrote the whole show, what it is now, in about a year, but I have some like tiny bits that harken back to even like when I first started
Right.
because it's about my relationship to American history. So I guess I'll do like a quick spoiler. I open the show with asking the audience how soon into a first date I bring up how much I know about the American Civil War,
Yes.
and I get people's responses. Some people say, "You do you, man, bring it up right away." The general consensus seems to be wait until much later or perhaps never, right? So that's the vibe of the show. It's participatory, it's self-deprecating. I talk about history, but it's all an avenue to like talk about myself, which is the thing we like to do most, right?
Yes, definitely. I think it's an interesting balance because I've spoken to quite a few comedians on here now, and they all have kind of different ideas of what the distance is between them and their comedy. I mean, when you're on stage with this show, is it very much this is just you talking to the audience, or do you feel like you've got kind of a persona in between?
I think it has a vibe of me just talking to the audience. It is the most structured I've ever been
Right.
because I did incorporate, I have slides. Slides are becoming more popular, and I love doing them.
Yes.
It's such a great way. I mean, you could get punchlines in and of themselves from just like a picture or a GIF or GIF. I don't know how you pronounce it. And it definitely keeps me more focused because I feel like I'm definitely a crowd work guy. I'm definitely feeling the vibe and setting the
Right.
vibe type of guy. So the structure of the PowerPoint presentation definitely helps me be more focused and do actual bits. But I'm the type of person like if a thing happens in the room,
Yes.
I have to talk about it. And I do admire some comedians that are just like, I've written an hour of jokes
Yeah.
and here they are. But it's just not how I operate.
Do you think that's something that you've kind of always done naturally, or is crowd work like a skill that you've had to build?
It's interesting. I didn't get to do crowd work for the longest time because the culture of, when I started doing comedy in New York, the culture of the open mics, which is where you have to start, is very
Yeah.
much like it would be weird
Right.
to do. You're not going to ask someone what they do. They're about to go up. You're going to
Yeah.
probably foil their thing. You know what I mean? So it took until like a year or two in where I was like booked on shows. And then a year or two after that, where I was booked on shows that were actually good and people were there
Right.
and they were drunk and they knew a comedy show wasn't happening. And there isn't a TV with American football
Yes.
behind me that I have to compete with for their attention. So after all that, yeah, but I have seen, because I've been going to as many shows as I've been performing here because it's just like an amazing opportunity. And I do see people that the first thing out of their mouth is the premise for their first joke. And I
Right.
think I admire that so much, but it feels so foreign to me. It would, how it would feel? I would feel like I was doing a one-man play instead of a stand-up show if
Yes.
I did it like that. I'd feel stiff. I'd be like, I might as well have a teleprompter, at the other end of the room.
Yes. Totally. Are you good?
Yeah, yeah. I saw remaining time 10 minutes. I don't know if that is
Yes, it
bad.
pops up. It's all good. I mean, we're getting around the middle section soon, but yeah, we're
Okay.
good. Sorry, I think normally it only shows up for me because I normally the guests don't seem to notice it. So I saw you suddenly freeze, and for a second I was genuinely like, "Oh God, is something terrible that happened?"
I just shit myself. I got so excited talking about American history. I shit my pants.
I mean, I would love to be able to put that in the episode, but
Not unlike Joe Biden.
yeah, it was very was it Mitch McConnell in the U.S. who just multiple times just froze mid sentence?
Oh my God, him and Dianne Feinstein. That's the thing is like Biden's not. I mean, Biden's too old to be in any position of responsibility, but he's not even the worst example of that because we have Dianne Feinstein, who's never been like filmed doing this, but like there was like a hit piece. Actually, I don't think the person that wrote it would describe it as a hit piece, but it was basically like Dianne Feinstein, who's a senator from California,
Yeah.
she straight up has dementia. Not even like, oh, she has some gas here and there. It's like we are hiding her from the public because of how bad. And then when that came out, she's like, okay, I guess I'll retire. And then I think Mitch McConnell's not running for re-election. I think that's the situation, but he had more than one like scary gas that kind of looked like, like maybe some kind of stroke. I'm not
Yeah.
a doctor, but literally like mid-sentence, I just feel like he's the bare minimum. And a lot of people are being like ageist as to how like they describe this. I think it's not about age. It's about when you hear them talk, would you feel comfortable getting in a car that they are driving? And if the answer is no, they can't be in any position of national authority. That's just my opinion.
I think that's a fantastic guideline. I really like that. I mean, it would require,
Yeah.
I feel like for a lot of, same in the UK, I think if you set that guideline here, it would require like a mass restructuring of all government. But yeah, that's good. But you're right, the timer is running close. So to prevent it from cutting you off mid-sentence, I think now is a good time to draw towards the middle section of the show. And the song you said you'd like me to use is All Out of Angst by, is it NOFX or is it NOFX?
No FX. They're a punk band.
No FX, that's good. What's the context?
So like no using FX. That's the.
Ah, that's good. I should have picked up on that. I don't know why I went for NOFX. But yeah, do you just like the song? Or is there.
Yeah, I just think No FX is one of my favorite bands, and it's just an upbeat ska song. It means nothing else to me other than that.
Right, brilliant.
Yeah, I've used it as my walk-up music. In New York, I do roast battles, and they ask you for your walk-up music, and that's my walk-up music. Just to sort of introduce the vibe that I have this like high energy, happy to be here, and party thing going on.
Definitely. Do you have house music for American History Sucks?
I don't. I've just been putting like a random pop playlist when people enter the room.
Yes.
But no, maybe I should start a playlist. But it's hard. There's not very many patriotic bops. You know what I mean? Like no one hears the Star Spangled Banner is like, oh hell yeah, dude, turn up. So
not so much in Edinburgh.
Maybe the only thing I can think of is Miley Cyrus's Party in USA.
Do you know what? That came to mind for me as well.
Yeah. But
that's good. Okay, right. So yeah, maybe at a future episode I'll go with Star Spangled Banner for the middle section. But this time it's gonna be All Out of Angst by NoFX. So yeah, here that comes, and then afterwards I will talk to you some more because that's how the show works. Welcome to the middle Hey, I'm podcasting here. That's what I might say if I was a podcaster in New York. But I'm not. But Bobby is. Bobby Sheehan, my New York guest. You know, Bobby, I got a bone to pick with you. You think you're so unique, knowing history and facts, knowing things. Well, I can do history too. So, in between the lyrics of Bobby's choice of song, Angst, by the band Nofix, I'm going to be delivering some white-hot historical presidential knowledge, real juicy stuff. Now, because of time constraints, I haven't had the time to fact-check what I'm saying. Ooh, but fact-checking's important, you say. Yeah, important to nerds, and I'm not a nerd like you. I'm Jeff Goldblum's The Fly, without the definite article. Let's kick it, baby. Next step, Mongolia. Don't get to golf, or fuck, or bowl with ya. The first president of the United States of America, Abraham Lincoln, was actually shot in the head by John Wilkes Booth. Throw out that handicap. No stepping out till spring. Now, what many don't know is that Booth was Lincoln's femboy mistress, and the shooting was a tragic misunderstanding. Right before their date at the theater, Lincoln whispered to Booth, "I want you to take me. I want head, also known as a blowjob. I want you to get me off with back shots." Unfortunately, Booth was wearing cat ears at the time and misheard Lincoln's instructions as, I want you to stand at my back and take the shot, blow my head off, and do a good job. And well, the rest is history. In fact, it's difficult to sing when it's 20 below. And that's during the day. I'm not insane. FDR invented poppers. I hope everybody enjoyed that song in the middle. So to get back, it's becoming, tradition's the wrong word, this sounds more highfalutin than I mean, but will you be flyering for the show in Edinburgh? Or are you flyering since it started?
Yeah, so I have two shows that I'm flying for because I have a compilation show with my fellow friends doing the Fringe. They're all from the States, so the show is called An American Comedy Showcase. Very original.
Great.
That's the theme of the show, is that we're all from a certain place.
Right.
Isn't that great? But yeah, if anybody's interested in coming to that, that's at 11:30 every night at Three Sisters. And so I fly for that one.
Okay, great.
And then, yeah, I do that show. I do the first spot on that show because that show's at 11:30. And I walk 15 minutes to be at the front of the other venue where I'm doing my hour, and I bark for an hour there.
Oh, damn.
So flying, I know you spent some time in the States, Patrick, but I don't
Yeah.
know if you know what barking is.
Not in this context.
Yeah, exactly. So barking, of course, is the sound that a dog makes, but in the States, we don't call it flyering, mostly because the act of actually like putting paper in people's hands, for whatever reason, in a stand-up context, is not something we do in the States.
Right.
We just stand outside the venue and try to like literally get people in. So we yell, "Hey, comedy show!" So we bark at them like a dog would bark. I'm trying to code switch appropriately while I'm here and say flyering instead of bark.
Barking that does sound like a very American way to describe that activity.
Yeah, we use a lot of like militaristic language for mundane stuff. Yeah, so yeah, barking like a dog, like a pit bull.
Yes.
But I've been yelling, barking, flyering 2 hours every day and will for the duration of the festival. So whenever I'm not talking, I have cough drops in my mouth trying to save my voice. I think you sort of acclimate to stuff. So the first few days, my voice is like, I can't do this anymore.
Yeah.
And I think now my throat is like, all right, I guess this is our life now. Let's adjust.
Yeah, definitely. When you're barking or flying or yelling, how are you pitching it? Are you just saying, "Oh, comedy show starting soon, come and see," or do you have like a street pitch?
Yeah, I do have sort of a street pitch. I think first and foremost, you have to get people's attention, and I feel bad for because I see folks flying, and I think maybe they might be a little more introverted or not,
Yeah.
or they probably have the very like healthy concept of like not wanting to bother people, but which is great unless you want them to do something.
Yes.
And unless you want them to come to your comedy show, then you sort of do have to bother them. So I'll get people off guard by like going not an octave higher. Like if my normal speaking voice is a 5, I'll go to like a 7.5.
Right.
And it's personalized. So I'll be like, you guys, you're not going to believe this. You're on time for the comedy show. It's about to start. You're wearing a hat. I'm wearing a hat. Let's be friends. And you know what's funny is I was talking to my friend about this because for my compilation show, he and I do this together. And I think it's so fascinating that there's a certain type of person that's so agreeable that they seem literally upset that they think they're disappointing you by not like grabbing a flyer coming to your show.
Yes.
I want to explain to them, I'm like, you can't live like this. You're in Edinburgh during the festival, like people are gonna yell at you. You just gotta keep walking. You know what I mean?
It's 100% true.
Yeah.
I was gonna say again, I think Americans have this inbuilt much more because British people, especially like I went up as a student last year, so I was hanging out with a bunch of other student comedians, and it was very hard. We were all very much like, we had to quickly get over our inbuilt urges to flyer at people by going like, "Hey, I'm so sorry to bother you. I'm so sorry I'm even talking to you, man. There's a show. I mean, you might not even like it. I feel really bad. It's fine, but we'd love to see you there, but no pressure to, man." And obviously you can't sell anything like that. So I think definitely that American coming in with like, "You gotta come and see it. This is the best show in town. It's gonna be a riot." Is exactly what you need.
And I do approach it as being like I'm doing them a favor.
Yes.
Because, the whole thing is like, hey, you guys are going to laugh your balls and or tits off if you come to my comedy show. And I'm like, so how great am I a guy to tell you about? And there is like a hint of irony, so I don't seem like I'm entirely selling snake oil, but yeah, you want to get people excited, you know. I think
Absolutely.
it's easy for us to get sort of jaded and be like, oh, it's another comedy show. But some people, they have never been to one or they've been to one or two. So it
Yes.
is like an event. And therefore, I think it should be like pitched as one, you know?
Yes, definitely. I mean, how has it been with post flaring, like getting crowds? I mean, how many have you been doing shows since the first?
Yes, I've been doing the shows since the first, and luckily I haven't had to call any shows, meaning like I've never had to cancel any shows due to low
Yeah.
attendance. But there are definitely, yeah, I've experienced because what's today, the seventh, so I've done like a full week now, and I've experienced the range of like a full room. I have a tiny room, which I think works well with how I
Right.
do it. So a packed room is still like only 40 people, right? But I've
Yeah.
had a couple of nights where like close to 40 people have come, right? So like luckily I haven't had to turn anyone away, but it's still like a full room.
Yeah.
But like those nice intimate shows where it's like, 7 to 12 people, those are fun too.
Yeah.
I feel like they become a little more conversational. They almost have to be. But I did one last night, which was one of those. I think about 8 people came. And usually when it's 8 people, it does come off more like conversational. But they were sort of the best of both worlds because they were good laughers, but they wanted to, I guess, just listen to what I had to say and not like interject so much. So it was really fun, man. I've been liking it. I think it's quite an ask to have
Right.
people come out to a show at 1 a.m. So when people do, I'm just like, I'm so grateful.
Yeah, definitely.
And I've caught a lot of people like they're literally just about to head out. They've been
Yeah.
drinking a little bit maybe, and I'm like, hey guys, you're already here.
Yes.
I say the show's 59 minutes because it sounds less than an hour, and it is. Just like mentally, people are
Yeah,
like, oh,
absolutely.
less than an hour, I could stay then. So yeah, the crowds have been really fun. I'm enjoying learning what an international crowd knows about American history because it is a
Yes.
bit conversational. I do ask people at some point during the show just to yell out American presidents, which I feel guilty about because I think I know four British prime ministers. I know Winston Churchill, the guy that fucked a pig, uh, Tony Blair for some reason, and who's Girl Reagan? Um,
Thatcher.
yeah, Margaret Thatcher. I
Yeah.
know her too. So, and the fact that, the average British person, for example, knows like way more than four presidents. Like they know all of Mount Rushmore, they know the founding fathers, they know like all the presidents that have been alive in their lifetime, which can be as little as four and as many as, I don't know, 10.
Yeah.
You know, I have a very mild joke in my set about the JFK assassination. Like I don't think it's an edgy joke. I mean, it's a thing that happened over 60 years ago, right? But I've had baby boomers and even older folks in the audience that have been like, "Oof!"
Oh, come
Like their emotional reaction is if I just told like a I don't know like a 9/11 joke or a 11/9 joke as you would call it. So
on.
yeah, it's sort of interesting I've toured the show before, so I've done like an abridged version of it in England last year. But this is the first time I'm doing like a full hour on a consistent basis. And the fact that the show is at 1 in the morning means that like the median age is 25,
Yeah.
you know, which is good for a history show.
Right.
I've done history shows, I market it as like, hey, if you like history, come, and then the median age is dead,
Right.
and
Yeah.
that's it's a little difficult. Yeah, people like I said the word thought the other day,
Yeah.
and I had this old lady look at me like, "What does that mean?" And I had to be like, "It means floozy." I don't know.
That's brilliant. I mean, to me, it seems like a great time slot because I assume people are a bit more loosened up. I've seen a couple comedians, especially when starting out at the Fringe, who have like, I went to see someone, I really enjoyed the show. It was 2:20 p.m. and there was barely anyone there, and it was a great show and everybody was clearly enjoying it. But also it was that thing of, I don't know if you've had this specific experience, but where people are like, even though they're having a great time, they're like embarrassed to laugh because it's such a small group of people. They don't want to stand out. And so she did really well, but she really had to fight to kind of get reactions out of them because everyone was kind of, especially as it's a small venue, so they're all sat like right in front of her. And yeah, Do you feel like doing it that late, you're getting people who are a bit more loosened up, like a bit tipsier maybe?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think that as performers, we forget that some people are self-conscious. I mean, we're self-conscious in a different way, but
Right.
I think I try to be cognizant of the fact that like even when I'm doing like regular crowd work, and I never try to embarrass people or make them seem stupid or whatever, but like even just asking someone what they do, they might be scared of public speaking, even if it's just to say their job description
Yeah.
in front of 40 people. You know what I mean? So, yeah, there's always going to be a bit of self consciousness among any group of people in general. And I think, especially, yeah, when it's a small group. And I haven't, it's interesting. People are like, 1 a.m., there's going to be a lot of drunk people. And there are drunk people, but it's not the vast majority.
Right.
You know, I think some people are night owls or they just, they're on vacation. So, the rules could
Yes. Yeah.
go out the window. Calories don't count when you're on vacation, and neither does like a consistent sleep schedule. People are jet lagged. It is interesting, and you have to get used to that as a comic, that some people, as frustrating as it is to me, are quiet laughers. They are
Yes.
chucklers. They are put the hand over the mouth. But I don't know. I spend the first few minutes of being on stage just bullying people into clapping for various reasons. And I feel like that gets you like, how like actors or like improv people, they warm up, they go, zip zap zip or whatever.
Yes. Yeah.
And okay, I'm ready to go. Like I feel like you got to do that for the audience. You're like, listen, under normal circumstances, we would all be looking at our phones silently, but this isn't a normal circumstance. This is a
Yes.
comedy show. So when I ask the first thing I do is I ask a question and I'll say clap if XYZ, right?
Yes.
And if anybody raises their hand, they're immediately admonished. I go, we do not raise our hand at a comedy show. We clap, or if you don't feel like moving your hands, you go woo.
Yeah.
And I understand that's weird because in any other context, if I'm, Patrick, you live in Wales. So if I asked you, do you live in Wales? Your response would not be woo. But at a comedy show, it has to, because the
Yes.
rules are different. We're collective. We're in this experience together.
Yes, absolutely.
But yeah, I feel like if you just like a lot of it is just to acknowledge the weirdness with every Fringe show, and I've only done 7 of them, but I've been to more.
Yeah.
And every show is weird in some way, whether it's because there's not a lot of people there, or because it's too hot, or it's too cold,
Yeah.
or the microphone doesn't work. Oh my God, the first day, microphone didn't work.
Oh, fuck, man.
And of course, the same day the microphone didn't work, it was a packed audience. They were a rowdy audience. So I literally had to yell for an hour. I woke up and I was like, I hope we figure out how to fix the microphone because I cannot do this for 25 days in a row.
Yeah, Christ. That's yeah, that is tough. Have you ever had issues with the reverse? Have you had that thing of doing the conversational stuff and trying to balance it with keeping the show going, but the person you're talking to is clearly, they're like loving it a little too much, if you know what I mean? Like, they're like, oh, this is my moment to shine, and you gotta reel it in.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think that some people, there's a nice way to be like, hey, it's over now. You got to break up with the audience member. Be like, listen, I enjoyed our time together, but now I have to do my own thing. And it's not you, it's me. I'm the one that has more stuff to say. Okay. Yeah, there is sort of that. I think it's so funny. I think a lot of the times we become armchair psychologists. Like,
Right.
we're watching, maybe on a compilation show, we're watching the performer before us and we're like, okay, who's going to not understand the rhythm of crowd work and who will?
Yeah.
And you got to find that like Goldilocks midpoint, if you can find one, like somewhere in between, because there are people that are too shy. They're too embarrassed. They'll give you one word answers. They don't like the attention. And then there's people that I think have never received attention before. And they're like, did I just make a friend? They don't understand that it means to an end in a comedy show. So yeah, I mean, it's usually not a big deal. I get if they don't necessarily immediately understand the rhythm of crowd work, being like, okay, we're going to move on. That doesn't bother me. People that straight up heckle me, and I'm not used to it, Patrick, because it is more popular in the UK.
Right. Yeah, that does make sense.
But I will say, and this isn't just to kiss your butt, but I think people in the UK, the audiences heckle more, but there's almost a vibe of like, once you quote unquote get them, once you're like, all right, shut up, you bald idiot, something more clever than that. But like, once you get them, they're like, he got me. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah, I could see
I
that.
haven't experienced like a drunk person having to be removed, which seems to happen in the US with more
Right.
frequency. It's not like, oh, we're roasting each other, and then once he gets me, and like he's earned my silence. It's like I'm drunk and I don't understand what's happening, so I
Yeah.
get let I hate to say it sometimes, and I almost don't want to say this publicly because I feel like it's gonna encourage people to do it, but sometimes people are very fucking funny.
Yeah.
I'll say something and I'm like, and you're selfish as the person on stage. You're like, I want all the laughters, but
Yeah.
every once in a while, someone has like I can't think of an example, but actually, I had one time someone guess the punchline to my joke,
Ah.
and it was frustrating, but at the same time, I'm like, ma'am, you and I are just like on such the same wavelength. It was like this older lady, and she guessed the end to my like kind of edgy joke, so I was like, oh shit, all right. Granny can hang with the rest of them. It was kind of funny. Yeah, I don't know. I would prefer nobody interrupting while I'm performing, but the silent non-laughers are worse,
Yes.
in my opinion.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, like you said about getting the audience on side, I think that can sometimes work in your favor too. Because I feel like shows I've been to where there's been heckles, or even like live, well, they're all live, but like streamed shows where there's heckles, it often seems like the comedian really doesn't have to do that much brilliant in response for the audience to love it. Because I think once you get that trust between them where the audience is on the comedian's side, when someone heckles, you really want to see the comedian take it well and kind of win that little battle.
Mm-hmm.
And when that happens, I think it feels like everybody's a little bit more on their side because they're like, okay, they handled that. And when they don't, it's not like the audience is all like, oh, wow, what a loser. But they're also all a bit more, there's a little bit of like discomfort. So yeah, I think handling that is definitely a skill.
Well, it's almost like if you're the passenger of a car and the driver is, if you were in a taxi and the taxi driver didn't seem to fully understand the rules of the road, you'd be like, are we in trouble? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or maybe a better metaphor is like you're the conductor. When you're on stage, you're like, listen, I have control of the room.
Yes.
And don't worry. My biggest pet peeve, and this hasn't happened at any of my French shows, it seems to be more of a New York thing, is that like you'll get these intimate spaces, right? And there's no security, right?
Yeah.
It's not like at a regular club where there's just, like you could just snap your fingers and a big guy drags the person out of the club. So maybe there's like a half dozen people and just one of them is too drunk in a bad way, and they ruin the show for the whole group. Then it has to be this thing of like, all right, I have to babysit this one guy.
Yeah.
I had this situation like a few weeks ago back in the States where this guy, like, you'd get on stage and he'd immediately start talking to you. And I watched the first couple comedians be like, all right, I guess this is the rhythm of, I got to talk to this guy, get him on my side. And I don't normally do this, but every time he said something, I would, without looking at him, put my finger up and go, not right now. And then just keep telling the joke. And it wasn't a fantastic set because, like, I'm very much, I think I mentioned this before, I'm not like a set up punchline tag without interacting with the audience at all. I think it's very cool that some people can do that. So I was just like machine gun saying the things.
Yeah.
And people were laughing, but it was, and I'm literally not looking at him. And I'm hoping that the tiny bit of self-awareness that everyone must have, right? He's starting to be like, oh, I'm being an asshole. I don't think he ever felt that way because I watched the entire show and he never stopped. But I decided I had 10 minutes and I wanted to talk about what I was going to talk about. Yeah. And I didn't want to talk to this Canadian Trump supporter for any longer than I had to. It's like, dude, we get it. You're from Toronto and you love Trump. I don't care. No one else here cares.
It often feels like not that I come across a lot of them in rural Wales, but it feels like Trump supporters or a kind of MAGA-esque people who are Canadian seem to be the most vocal. There's something a little bizarre about that.
Well, you know what I think it is because like, I think the equivalent of that is like sometimes like people from the States will like come to Europe and they're apologetic in a way that I feel like is not necessary.
Yeah.
But that's what they have to do to feel like a good liberal, where they're like, listen, I didn't like the Iraq war. It's like no one is wondering if you like the Iraq. It's fine. You know what I mean? So they're almost like, listen, I'm from this, in some ways, like a right-leaning country, but I am a left-leaning
Yeah.
person. I feel like in Canada, because Canada's thought like to be, what if the whole United States was San Francisco? I feel like that's
Right.
what people in Canada is,
Yeah.
right? So I think that if you're even like a little right of center, but certainly if you're like a MAGA guy, you're like right after I tell everyone I'm Canadian, I also have to tell them that I'm not a cuck. You know what
Yeah.
I
You
mean?
gotta kind of, don't worry, guys. I am racist. I swear.
Yeah.
But yeah. I mean, drawing things to close, I just wanted to ask. I mean, you've had a week so far.
Mhm.
A couple ago. Do you feel like is the show kind of staying consistently similar? Do you expect it to stay the same, or do you kind of expect it to evolve a bit over the rest of the Fringe?
I think it's already evolving because I've had the opportunity to, do an hour 7 times in a row in front of bad crowds, mid crowds, and good crowds. You know what
Yeah.
I mean? And the good crowds are the most helpful because then I'm like, if they don't like something, it's gone forever.
Right. Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, so I think just what I like about New York is you could get up a bunch of times in a row, but for 10 minutes or less.
Yeah.
This has given me an opportunity. I've done an hour before, but I've never done it like so consistently, night after night after night. So I feel like the show is growing exponentially, like it gets better every time. And yeah, every night whether it's just like one line or like moving stuff around.
Yeah. Definitely.
And the Fringe crowds are very forgiving. Like I did a joke last night and I was like, that didn't work. What if I said this instead? Which is like if you did that in a club, people would be like, this is what?
Yeah.
What is happening? I'm a focus group of this guy's hour now, but in Fringe people are up for it. So I've been really enjoying it. And like I said earlier, like I'm fascinated by what non-Americans know about American culture and politics.
Yes.
Like everybody seems to know how horny Bill Clinton was. No one seems to know who Warren Harding is. That's fine. There's not many Americans know who he is either. So, and then I like to ask people like, what is a crazy politician in your country? And I asked somebody from Scotland, and they named somebody, and they were like, "Oh yeah, he had sexually assaulted someone." And I'm like, "All right, well that's not the vibe I'm going for."
Wow, wacky.
Yeah. I guess because the name of the show is American History Sex. I was talking about the sex lives of the presidents that just like popped into his head, but I'm like, no, something more zany.
Keep it light.
Yeah, but I step into like situations that I wouldn't like expect in the U.S. Like I had like the other night, I had two separate groups of Irish people.
Yeah.
Like one group was on the left side of the stage, and the other was on the opposite end, and not expecting. This is like a setup to one of my jokes, but I talked about how JFK was the first Catholic president, and the one group of Irish people cheered, and the other group of Irish people booed. I was like, guys, not right now, okay?
Not here.
Which is not something that would even happen in the U.S. So stuff like that's been interesting.
That's great. Yeah, I love that microcosm of Ireland, Northern Ireland conflict in your show.
I think obviously they weren't being 100% serious. I think.
Yeah.
I think it was like a trip to them to see like, does this guy even know what that is?
Yeah.
Because my knowledge of the UK and Ireland and Europe in general, I think like most Americans, it's fragmented, right?
Yeah.
So I'll know stuff, but I won't know other stuff. Like, I think when I went to England for the first time last year, but when I was traveling like 10 years ago, I met an English person. We were at a pub, and I forget the context, but he wanted to say thank you to me. But you guys, people in the UK, they say cheers sometimes.
Right. Yeah.
And I literally picked up my glass because the only context in which people from the States use cheers is to clink glasses.
Yes.
And he found that so hilarious that like piece of information just went past me for the first, 20 whatever years of my life. I also found out while traveling what a queue is. In my defense, I was younger. I was a teenager, but I was at some international airport. I don't remember where. And this lady, I think she was Australian. She was like, "Are you on the queue?"
Yeah.
And I literally didn't know what a queue was because we only say line, right?
Yes.
So even little idiosyncrasies like that, or like you guys say piss when you mean drunk and we mean piss to be angry.
Yes.
Like I'm learning all of that stuff now. And I know everybody talks about this, but I'll never get used to the fact that cars are driving on the left side of the road. Those signs that say look right, look
Oh yeah.
left, you're like, what idiot is this for? I'm the idiot. It's for me. I'm impressed that I've gone this far without getting hit by a car. I think it will happen eventually.
Honestly, that's the UK's fault because it's not even a Europe thing. It's just this one country just sticks to it. But that's a very British thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so as Josh, I mean, your show is, let's say, is great. I assume it's great, but we're about to hear a clip from it, and yeah, I don't know if you'd like to give a bit of context for it. I think it's going to be from the opening 7 minutes of one of your shows.
Yes, it's the first 7 or so minutes from my hour, American History Sex. It's when I ran it for the first time in Queens in New York City, close to a year ago.
Right.
So it's back when the show was only a half hour. I've since written more material, so it's an hour now, but it's a good introduction to what the show is about. So I think people will like it. If you do, please tell me. And if you don't like it, go ahead and send me a death threat. I don't mind.
All publicity, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, okay, great. So here comes that.
Let's move on to the first part of our presentation. It's called, here's where I don't know how to use the technology. Guys, we're going to get through this together. This is such the opposite of big load energy. All right, I went back. Hey, you always remember your first. Okay, so you'll have to split your time between my face and the television. So it's American History Sex. You always remember your first. Of course, I'm going to talk about presidential firsts. Hell yeah. I'm learning, guys. I'm 33 years old and I've never used an iPad before. This is my first time. So we've had a lot of presidential firsts. We've had our first Catholic president. We've had our first black president. We've even had our first dead presidents. And our first president with a mugshot. That's going to go down in history. But Trump is actually not the first president to be arrested. The first president to be arrested was Ulysses S. Grant. Now, Grant was the general of the Union Army, and as president, he destroyed the Ku Klux Klan, but he had a dark side. He used to ride his carriage a little too fast. This is true. As president, Grant was pulled over by a Washington, D.C. police officer, and the police officer said, "Did you know how fast you were going?" And then he quickly added, "Are you the president?" And the cop said, "Forgive me, sir, if I knew you were the president, I wouldn't have pulled you over." And Grant replied, "What would you have done if I'm not the president?" And he said, "Well, I would have arrested you." And Grant said, "Son, you better arrest me then." And I just love that juxtaposition between him and Trump. It's such the opposite of Trump energy. Trump is like, why can't I pay off porn stars and my political enemies? Meanwhile, Grant is like, I do sometimes drive a little too fast. Sorry. Let's talk about Lincoln, dude. I love Lincoln. Lincoln was a lot of firsts. First president to be on the penny, of course. First president to be a Republican. Party's a little different now. First president to be assassinated. And he's the first president to have a beard. Her name is Mary Todd. Lot of speculation about Lincoln's sexuality. Some people think that he may have been gay, and this is mostly because in his 20s and his 30s, he did what was called the lawyer circuit. So him and his partner, who was also a man, would sometimes share a room, and sometimes they would share a bed. But as someone that's young and chasing their dream as well, I can confirm that that doesn't necessarily, that's the bed, that doesn't necessarily make you gay. It was my job to book the hotel room. I thought there were 2 full-size beds. Turns out there was 1 queen, but we're secure in our masculinity. And we cuddled up together, mostly because the heat was broken. Don't stay at the Super 8 in Lexington, Kentucky. You're not going to have a nice time. Oh, wait, that's in Pennsylvania. You guys get it, though. So, I've been all over. I've been to Pennsylvania. I've even been to Kentucky. So Lincoln was probably straight, but we do know this. So according to that law partner, a friend and biographer, Lincoln told him that he had been infected with syphilis in Beardstown. We all know what happens in Beardstown. In either 35 or 36 by a prostitute. Now, Lincoln is probably not the first president to have an STD, but he is the president with the world's worst friend. By the way, if anyone here has an STD, I'm not judging you, okay? This is a judgment-free zone. Many great Americans have had STDs. It's no big deal, totally natural, nothing to be ashamed of.
And it's happened. Wow, that was fantastic. And it actually is. I left it too late to watch the whole thing because I've been backed up today. But I'm going to finish it after, and I did very much enjoy the beginning. But yes, as for seeing the actual show, obviously we know you're in Edinburgh right now, but what are the wheres and whens of it? And also anything else you'd like people to follow on?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Patrick. So you could get updates either from going on my website, which is Bobby Sheehan, LOL like laugh out loud. So BobbySheehanLOL.com is my website. I'm also pretty active on Instagram. Same thing, Bobby Sheehan LOL. I have a podcast that comes out every Sunday. It's called the 4 Hours Podcast. Just an hour of pretty much something like this, just talking with other people that I find interesting. And yeah, if you're in Edinburgh, I'm doing the entire festival, the whole run with the exception of the 12th, or technically the 13th, because it's every night at 1 a.m. It's called American History Sex. Yeah, and it's at 32 Below. It's part of the Counting House Beer Garden. So if you go to 32 Below, it's a place called the Little Cellar. It's a 40-seater. You don't have to buy tickets in advance, but I would recommend coming at least 15 minutes early to make sure you get a good seat. And if you have any questions about the show or just want to chit-chat, my Instagram DMs are always open. Again, Bobby Sheehan LOL. I also have a American Comedy Showcase if you want to see me and my fellow Americans do 10 minutes a piece of comedy. That's every night at the Little Sisters Bar at 11:30 p.m. Would love to see you at either or both. And yeah, I think that's it, man. Thank you so much for having me.
Brilliant. No, thank you so much for coming on. This has been great. Yeah, no, this has been really good. I think I've been looking forward to this one because I think you were one of the earlier emails that I got through. And then just for scheduling reasons, it's been the longest. So there's been a big build up, but I very much enjoyed it. And yeah, again, thank you so much for coming on. This has been great. I've been Patrick. My guest has been Bobby Sheehan. And I'll see you next episode. I was going to say next week, but I think next episode is in a couple of days. And Bobby, well, we'll hopefully see you tonight. Although this won't come out by tonight, but he might see you anyway. Time's weird.
I see you at all times, listener. I'm like Santa Claus. I see you when you're sleeping, and I know when you're awake.
If you ever laugh at something and you're not entirely sure why, it's because Bobby just telepathically gave you a stand-up set.
Exactly.
That's brilliant. Goodbye, everyone.
Thank you for making it all the way to the end of the show. You can find the show on Instagram at NeverIsFunny, all one word, all lowercase. The music used in the intro and outro is There It Is by Kevin MacLeod and Comptech.com, licensed under Creative Commons by Attribution 4.0 license, creativecommons.org/licenses/by/4.0. The guest next week is Daryl Martin, who runs Just the Tonic. At the Edinburgh Fringe? No way, that's crazy, that's so topical. I'll see you then, bye.